In 1998, one company controlled almost the entire 3D gaming market. Their technology powered most high-end gaming PCs. Their name was cool, their product felt like witchcraft. And then, 2 years later, they were gone. Sold for scraps. Picked apart by the very competitor they refused to take seriously. This is the story of 3DFX Interactive, the company that invented modern PC gaming, and then destroyed itself in slow motion. Let's go back. Before 1996, 3D gaming on a PC was, to put it kindly, a disaster. Your CPU, the brain of your entire computer, was doing everything at once. Physics, AI, rendering, all of it. Frame rates were awful, resolutions were embarrassing. Games like Tomb Raider and Quake, games that were supposed to feel cinematic and immersive, looked like blocky, stuttery nightmares on most machines. Gamers wanted better. The hardware just couldn't deliver. Until 3 guys in San Jose decided to change that. In 1996, 3DFX Interactive released the Voodoo graphics card. And to call it a graphics card is almost underselling it. This thing was a 3D accelerator. It didn't even do 2D graphics. You had to keep your old VGA card, physically plug the Voodoo into it with a pass-through cable, and let the Voodoo take over the moment a 3D scene hit the screen. It sounds clunky, it looked insane, and it was absolutely, undeniably magic. Suddenly, Quake wasn't just playable, it was breathtaking. Tomb Raider went from a muddy slideshow to a smooth, atmospheric experience. Unreal, a game literally built to showcase the limits of 3D technology, ran like a dream. The difference between software rendering and a Voodoo card wasn't incremental, it was a different universe. But how? What made the Voodoo so untouchable? 3 things. First, bilinear filtering. This is the technology that smoothed out textures so they didn't look like a tiled bathroom floor. On a standard PC, wood looked like wood-coloured squares. On a Voodoo card, it looked like actual wood. Gamers lost their minds. Second, stable, fluid frame rates. The Voodoo's 50 MHz processor and dedicated 4 MB of RAM meant your CPU was finally free. It didn't have to carry the 3D workload anymore. Games went from 15 frames per second to 60. The difference felt like going from a flipbook to a movie. Third, and this is the one that really matters, the Glide API. API is like OpenGL and Direct3D were universal translation layers. They had to work on any hardware, which meant they couldn't be truly optimized for any hardware. They were the jack of all trades that mastered none. Glide was different. Glide spoke directly to the Voodoo's soul. It bypassed the middleman entirely and sent native instructions straight to the chip. The performance advantage was massive. Developers loved it. Publishers started building games specifically for it. For a brief moment, buying a 3DFX card wasn't just an upgrade, it was a membership to a better reality. By 1997 and into 1998, 3DFX was untouchable. Their market share was staggering. Competitors existed, sure, but nobody was in the same conversation. 3DFX didn't just lead the market, they were the market. And that's exactly when things started to fall apart. Here's something nobody talks about when they discuss 3DFX's decline. The arrogance wasn't loud and obvious. It was quiet. It was a series of decisions that each seemed reasonable in isolation and catastrophic in combination. The first crack, 32-bit color. By the late 90s, the entire industry was pushing toward richer, deeper color palettes, more nuance, more realism, more visual fidelity. 3DFX looked at this trend and shrugged. Their position was that 16-bit color was good enough, because running 32-bit would cut your frame rate. Speed over beauty. They believed gamers would always choose performance. They were wrong. And worse, they were stubborn about being wrong. But that wasn't the fatal blow. The fatal blow came in December 1998, when 3DFX spent $141 million to acquire a company called STB Systems. STB was a graphics card manufacturer, and 3DFX's logic made a certain kind of sense. Instead of selling chips to other companies who would build and sell the cards, why not control the entire pipeline? Design the chip and make the card and sell it directly. Cut out the middleman, capture more margin, own the whole thing. Here is what actually happened. Every single board partner 3DFX had, the companies actually building and selling Voodoo-based products, was suddenly a competitor. Creative Labs, Diamond Multimedia, Hercules. These weren't small players. These were major distribution channels with massive retail relationships. And the moment 3DFX turned them into rivals, they did the only logical thing. They called NVIDIA. And NVIDIA picked up the phone. Within months, almost every major board partner had switched sides. The entire distribution network that 3DFX had spent years building, gone. Not slowly, not gradually, all at once. 3DFX had, in a single acquisition, handed their greatest competitor a fully loaded weapon and pointed it directly at themselves. The manufacturing side was even worse. STB's factory in Mexico was not equipped to compete with the massive, hyper-efficient Asian manufacturers supplying NVIDIA's partners. Costs were higher, output was slower, quality control was inconsistent. 3DFX had wandered into a war they didn't know how to fight, on terrain they'd never trained for, with weapons that were already outdated. Meanwhile, NVIDIA was not sitting still. The Riva TNT had already shown that 3DFX's lead was shrinking, but in 1999, NVIDIA did something nobody expected. They didn't just release a faster graphics card, they released a new kind of chip entirely. The GeForce 256. Marketed as the world's first GPU, graphics processing unit, a term that literally did not exist before this moment. And the reason they could claim that title came down to one specific feature: transform and lighting. Before the GeForce 256, all the heavy mathematical work of calculating 3D geometry, moving vertices, applying lighting, transforming objects in space, was done by the CPU. The GeForce moved all of that onto the graphics chip itself. The CPU was suddenly free to do more. The graphics chip was suddenly doing more. Everything was faster, smoother, and more complex than anything 3DFX had. 3DFX's answer was the Voodoo 5. And to be fair, in raw game performance it was competitive. It had serious power. It even introduced SLI, Scalable Link Interface, which let you run multiple cards simultaneously for extra performance, but the Voodoo 5 needed its own dedicated power connector. It was large, it was expensive. And then the 3D Mark 2000 benchmark dropped, a synthetic test that heavily weighted transform and lighting performance, and the Voodoo 5 looked weak on paper, even when it wasn't weak in practice. For a mainstream audience that trusted benchmark scores over nuanced analysis, that was enough. The narrative flipped. The king was dead. 3DFX threw their last chips at a desperate acquisition, a company called Gigapixel that they hoped could rescue their next-generation architecture. It didn't work. The money was gone. The partners were gone. The benchmark crown was gone. In December 2000, NVIDIA acquired 3DFX's assets for around $70 million. The patents, the engineers, the brand, everything that had made 3DFX worth something was absorbed into the company that had beaten them. The remaining legal shell filed for bankruptcy and quietly ceased to exist. 4 years, from undisputed king to acquired corpse. 4 years. But here's what I want you to sit with. 3DFX didn't lose because NVIDIA was smarter. They lost because they stopped being hungry. They had the lead. They had the partners. They had the API. They had the mind share. And instead of protecting it, they made a $141 million bet that manufacturing was more important than innovation. Right at the exact moment NVIDIA was redefining what innovation even meant. It was suicide in slow motion. And the worst part? They could see it happening. 3DFX gave us the 3D accelerator. They gave us Glide. They gave us SLI. They gave us the proof that dedicated 3D hardware wasn't a niche luxury. It was the future of everything. Every time you load up a modern game and watch a world that looks almost real, you are standing on a foundation that 3DFX poured. They just never got to see the building. The next time your GPU renders something beautiful, remember the Voodoo. Because without 3DFX, there might not be a GPU at all.